BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Wednesdays, I talk to you guys about Jack the Ripper, perhaps the world's most famous unsolved mystery. And in this episode, I will be joined by Kieran McConnell from the Cliff's Edge podcast later on. But first, I would like to discuss the Moab and Midian Letter, as well as looking at some comments from the Rippercast about the Thames Torso Killer. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about Jack the Ripper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. First, I would like to give a shout out to YouTube user 158, who had a comment from last week's episode about the From Hell letter. Jack the Ripper was, of course, a serial killer who operated in England in 1888, but there's also a set of letters that could have possibly come from the killer. And 158 writes, "Hi Ned, I hope you see this. The Dear Boss letter was received by the Central News Agency on September 27th of 1888 and signed Jack the Ripper, and it is most commonly attributed to the journalists Frederick Best and Tom Bulling, sometimes spelled Bullen, Bullen. Fred Best was a journalist at the Star newspaper during the time of the Whitechapel murders. In 1931, Frederick Best reportedly confessed to a fellow journalist that he, along with a colleague, often identified as Tom Bulling, wrote the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard to maintain public interest in the Jack the Ripper case and to boost newspaper sales. This confession was recounted in a 1966 article in Crime and Detection magazine, where Best admitted to fabricating the letters to keep the business alive. Tom Bulling was a journalist at the Central News Agency who received the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard. The Central News Agency was an organization known for embellishing news to compete with other agencies. In 1913, a letter from a detective chief inspector named John Littlechild to the journalist George R. Sims stated that the Scotland Yard believed that Bulling was the author of the Dear Boss letter, a view widely held among police at the time. This is corroborated by Dr. Robert Andersons, who was the head of the CID in 1888, in his 1910 memoirs. He implied that he knew the journalist was responsible, but refrained from naming him to avoid legal repercussions. Bulling also forwarded a transcript of the Moab and Midian letter to Scotland Yard, received by the Central News Agency on October 5th of 1888, 4 days after the Saucy Jackie postcard. Tom Bulling's exclusive handling of this letter raised suspicions about his involvement. In 2018, a forensic linguist named Dr. Andrea Nini linked this letter linguistically to the Dear Boss letter and Saucy Jackie postcard, suggesting common authorship. Firstly, 15.8, I really do thank you for writing out this and taking the time to do that, as well as including all of these details. Before I did Ripper Wednesday, I used to do a segment on Black Box Online Radio called the Anything Goes Friday segment, where I would talk about literally any subject. Any subject was fair game. And I did my first episode about Jack the Ripper in 2021 for the Anything Goes Friday segment, and I did a series of Jack the Ripper episodes in 2022, and at that time, I was just absolutely giving my seal of approval to this Ripper hoax theory, if you want to call it that the journalists wrote the letters, and specifically the journalist Frederick Best, when I heard that he made the confession in 1931, and that it was something that he had done rather discreetly, but he only confessed to fabricating 2 letters, the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard, but not the From Hell letter, which had different handwriting. That was raising a lot of suspicions. And when I read the reports of Dr. Andrea Nini, or at the very least the press coverage, she was stating that there were so many similarities between the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard that it appears that they are written by the same person. And she is a forensic linguist, so she's not looking at the tone and personality of the letters by itself. She's also looking at the language clusters, like how are people using phrasal verbs and linking verbs and conjunctions, as well as prepositions and infinitives, looking at how the grammar is put together. And at first it might seem like they're just ordinary words from the English language, but when you look at it in its entire context, she made a very convincing case that one person wrote the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard. Now there are some things here, though. Firstly, it was my understanding, though, when I read this stuff, that they're saying that they want to keep the business alive, right? Keep the newspaper business alive. But I have read since that the Star that Frederick Best worked at was actually doing rather well. So maybe by that they mean that they want to maintain the same levels of strength, or maybe even get a larger level of growth, striving for growth as opposed to being stagnant. Now, Tom Bowling is definitely somebody who comes under fire and scrutiny for writing the Dear Boss letter. Richard Jones of Jack the Ripper Tour even stated that he is his suspect for fabricating the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard. But I did find one thing, though, about Tom Bowling versus Tom Bolin, because that was so confusing. I mean, if you just read about Jack the Ripper, well, who was this suspect Thomas Bullen? Who was the suspect Thomas Bowling, B-U-L-L-E-N versus B-U-L-L-I-N-G? And there's actually a post about it that was written on jacktheripper.org, and that talks about the two different people. And I'm going to read this post, but to be clear, this is listed as a possibility. Thomas J. Bowling, the creator of Jack the Ripper? ? In fact, Inspector John Littlechild was wrong about the name of his writer suspect. It was Thomas J. Bowling, not Tom Bullen, B-U-L-L-E-N, not that one, who worked at the Central News Agency. Thomas Bullen, spelled B-U-L-L-E-N, was the man who, not long after the Dear Boss letter had been made public, forwarded a handwritten copy of another missive, which was dated on October 5th and was signed Jack the Ripper to the police, in the same handwriting. And again, this is stated as a possibility. Some people are stating that there are going to be two different people who have very similar names, but, I mean, based on this very, very slight similarity, I had always thought that they were talking about the same person. It seems that 15.8 is also thinking that they're talking about the same person, but I would always accept the evidence if someone provides a bigger piece of clarity. And I said in the past that I was completely accepting of Frederick Best being the author of the first Jack the Ripper letters, but over time I had to admit that, well, there are other suspects. You just heard that Thomas Bowling, B-U-L-L-I-N-G, is somebody who may have been the fabricator of the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard, or I think as 15.8 was putting it, they could have conspired together. But there's another suspect for fabricating these letters, and his name is Harry Dam. He was an American who worked for the San Francisco Examiner who was in London at the time, and I have a standalone episode about him as a Jack the Ripper suspect, and I invite you to check out my playlist on Jack the Ripper suspects. But as far as having any type of reversal, I'm just keeping an open mind and looking at the different suspects as of now. And at last, we're going to get to the title story for today's episode, talking about the Moab and Midian Letter. And casebook.org is going to give us an introduction to this one, because as you heard in the comment from 15.8, this is one that's going to come on October 5th. So we've already seen the debut of Jack the Ripper, and this is going to be a letter that was signed Jack the Ripper. An alleged communication was received from the Whitechapel murderer, which arrived at the Central News Agency on October 5th of 1888 to Thomas Bowling, spelled B-U-L-L-I-N-G. He transcribed the letter in a communique to the Metropolitan Police Chief Constable Adolphus Williamson the same day. And this is one of the unfortunate things. It appears that the actual text of the Moab and Midian letter is not in existence anymore, so we only have the transcription. The transcription says, Dear Mr. Williamson, at 5 minutes to 9 o'clock tonight we received the following letter, the envelope of which I enclose to you, and you will see that it is the same handwriting as the previous communications, dated October 5th. And now this is going to be the text of the letter that could have come from Jack the Ripper. Dear friend, in the name of God, hear me I swear, I did not kill the female whose body was found at Whitehall. If she was an honest woman, I will hunt down and destroy her murderer. If she was an honest woman, she was a whore of God, and bless the hand that slew her. For the women of Moab and Midian shall die, and their blood shall mingle with the dust. I never harm any others of the divine power that protects and helps me in my grand work, and would quit forever. Do as I do, the light of glory shall shine upon you. I must get to work tomorrow. Treble event this time. Yes, yes. 3 must be ripped, and will send you a bit of the face by postmark. I promise this, dear old boss. The police now reckon my work is a practical joke. Well, well, Jackie's a very practical joker. Ha ha ha. Keep this back till 3 are wiped out, and you can show the cold meat. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Now that is the text of the Moab and Midian letter. And even though I'm not a forensic linguist like Dr. Andrea Nini, what do you make of that reading right there? Because I'm noticing some similarities and differences to the previous communications. The Dear Boss letter is the one that's saying that Jack the Ripper is going to go after more whores. I'm down on whores and I shan't keep ripping until he's done, as well as saying that he took the blood from one victim, put it in a ginger beer bottle, but it went thick like glue, so he had to write his letter in red ink. Red ink will have to do. He's also saying my knife is so nice and sharp now. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha. I think that this letter, this transcription of the letter, starts out with some completely different ideas, some completely different language. He definitely does refer to women as whores, that's one. But this one is definitely more in line with the divine. And, I mean, I can just throw out one possibility. Could it not be that the From Hell letter was authentic, and the Moab and Midian letter is authentic too, from the killer, where somebody at first is writing the Dear Boss letter, they're reasonably composed. Saucy Jackie postcard, reasonably composed. By the Moab and Midian letter, they are not in a good state of mind, and they're starting to get a little bit crazier, for lack of a better term, and by the time the From Hell letter comes in, sending in half the kidney, then they're just absolutely bonkers, saying, like they can't even spell basic words in the English language, which to a reasonable degree, a lot of things here have been spelled correctly, although there are some mistakes. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is, actually, let me read the text again for you, and then I'll tell you the possibility. Dear friend, in the name of God, hear me, I swear, I did not kill the female whose body was found at Whitehall. If she was an honest woman, I will hunt down, destroy her murderer. If she was an honest woman, something was a whore of God, will bless the hand that slew her. For the woman of Moab and Midian shall die, and blood shall mingle with the dust. I never harm any others or the divine power that protects and helps me in my grand work, and would quit as ever. Do as I do, the light of glory shall shine upon you. I must get to work tomorrow. Treble event this time. Yes, 3 must be ripped, and will send you a bit of face by post. I promise this, dear old boss. The police shall now reckon my work a practical joke. Well, well, Jackie's a very practical joker. Ha ha. Keep this back till 3 are wiped out, and you can show the cold meat. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. I mean, I think that we just have to look at the context of this in the first part. The first, I guess 5 or 6 sentences, to me, personally, sound nothing like Jack the Ripper. The rest of this, though, like the second half of the letter, that sounds exactly like Jack the Ripper. So it's quite possible that someone got a little bit more creative with their language and wordplay. But the other thing that I would like to share with you here is really quite simple. I think that this person also misspelled the word triple. They spelled it treble, Treble. And ultimately, I would just like to say that I would be more inclined to believe that this was indeed written by perhaps this was indeed a hoaxer from the newspaper. Was it written by Thomas Bulling? Quite possible, but I'll let you guys decide. What do you think about that? And for now, I would like to welcome Kieran McConnell to the program. I'm joined by Ciaran McConnell. He is the co-host of the Cliff's Edge podcast. It is a true crime show that has explored numerous unsolved mysteries, such as Jack the Ripper, and they did a Zodiac Killer episode rather recently. Ciaran, are you with me?
Yeah, thanks for having me back on, Ned. It's good to be back. And yeah, well done on the Zodiac episode that you did for my podcast. It went really well, I thought, anyway.
Yes, and thank you, Ciaran. And what he's referring to is Ciaran's been a guest in the past talking about the Irish vanishing triangle. He is a criminologist from Ireland, and he has explored numerous mysteries as well as cases in the true crime world. So, Ciaran, just in case the audience is not familiar with the Cliff's Edge or your work, would you first like to tell us a little bit about your education?
Yeah, so I suppose my background would actually be law. So when I first went to college, which would be many moons ago, in Ireland they didn't actually have a criminology course. So I ended up studying law with criminal justice, and then I ended up having to do a diploma a few years later on criminology and mediation. So and basically I never really actually ended up working in that industry, so I started blogging about true crime in Ireland. And as you said, Ireland's Vanishing Triangle was the one I first started with, and nobody had ever really kind of put the cases together in a blog and stuff like that. So the blog did well, and then it became a podcast, and we're still making episodes today. And yourself, learning as you go.
Yes, absolutely. But for today's episode, we're going to be talking about Jack the Ripper. You and your co host Shane did an excellent Jack the Ripper episode. When did you first learn about Jack the Ripper?
Um, Actually, which is quite strange. I would have actually heard of the Yorkshire Ripper before I heard of Jack the Ripper, ironically, yeah. So I think I would have been quite young. I would have watched a documentary that I probably shouldn't have about Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, and then when the internet first came around, which would have been the late 90s, I began like searching cases, and I think that probably would have been the first time I would have heard about Jack the Ripper, probably around 97, 98, and then when you see the setting of Whitechapel and all that stuff, I'd be quite into history and kind of society type of thing. So, yeah, it really sucked me in, obviously. And then it's as you said, probably the greatest mystery of all time.
Yes, I would agree as well. But when you were composing the research for your podcast, as well as just exploring the material as a true crime follower, what were some of your first impressions about Jack the Ripper?
Well, my first thought would have been that he was definitely, well, almost definitely, as far as we could say, from the Whitechapel area. I know there was theories about somebody that was involved with the royal family and a few other people of high society being involved, but I just don't see how a person like that could have got around Whitechapel unnoticed. And a kind of a basic thing would be what that would make them stand out would be just personal hygiene. Whitechapel was like a slum. In the 1880s, so people wouldn't have bathed regularly or whatever. So people coming from aristocratic areas and stuff, it didn't really seem possible to me. So I always thought the starting point would be that the person was from Whitechapel.
And I do greatly appreciate that. So it means you're opposed to this theory involving the royal family, which would include Sir William Gold, the royal surgeon.
Yeah, because I think also back then, print media was in operation. So some of the few, I suppose, celebrities that would have been around back then, or people that would have been known, would have been the royal family. So again, it would quite make it difficult for somebody like that to move in such circles.
Okay, now, Kieran, you're the guest. So what I want to do is I want to give you a choice. Would you like to talk about the crime scenes and the victims, or would you rather talk about the Jack the Ripper suspects?
I think the crime scenes actually tell a lot to me because if you look at if you just jump forward to the fifth case, the Irish lady, her second name was Kelly. Sorry, Mary Jane Kelly. She was the one that was most extensively mutilated, and she took the Ripper back to her house, so he had privacy. So it's obviously I would have thought something he would have craved, and if he had any money, you would think he would have booked the equivalent of a hotel room there or whatever. So he didn't have a place of privacy, which would also imply to me that he wasn't a doctor, because most doctors back then, there wasn't really like big hospitals or whatever. They would have had their own surgery, and to carry out the mutilations, like there would be no better place than a doctor's surgery, you would have to think.
Well, I can definitely follow that train of thought, though. But if we start at the beginning, we have the August 31st murder of Polly Nichols. And this is one where there is just a very big surprise for Whitechapel. And people are really caught off guard by this, and it seems like a budding serial killer might have been on the loose. But with the murder of Polly Nichols, does anything stand out about you? This is in Bucks Row. I mean, I think we're dealing with perhaps around 3:35 in the morning. That's just an estimation. Of course, it could be around 3:30. Do you have any observations about that?
Yeah, well, I think, I suppose, like when you do the criminology, you kind of start to think like the criminal. That's the way to catch them, basically. So the best time to do the crime, right, is obviously, I would think, at them hours. Everybody, well, not everybody, but the vast majority of people who are out on the streets then are drunk. So they've been in the pub probably since 6 o'clock or whatever. It's dark. So it would make you think that the perpetrator was like putting some level of planning in it. And I think most of the crimes probably occurred around the weekend, or if not the weekend. So he probably worked some sort of menial job or something like that. Perhaps a butcher.
All right, now, does this mean that Jack the Ripper would have been drunk himself, or is he just planning ahead and he's thinking that the women are going to be drunk?
I would personally think he wasn't drunk, just by the way he was able to evade capture on some of the crimes, because I presume, the night where he killed the two women, that there would have been people out looking for him. So it would imply to me that he was probably sober himself. And as you said, you make a good point that the women that he was trying to abduct at this time, they wouldn't have been sober either, which makes them more vulnerable.
All right, but how does this factor into the Ripper's mental state? Because some people are proposing suspects who have had schizophrenia or neurosyphilis that are dealing with psychotic episodes, and it sounds like everything that you have just said indicates that the Ripper might actually be somewhat clear-headed. And I know that we are just trying to do our best. We don't actually know who Jack the Ripper was, but is that what you were indicating, that you think that the Ripper was much more clear-headed and not someone who would have been dealing with psychosis?
Well, it depends on what way you look at that, but I think, like, I know, like, there's, as you're saying, like, schizophrenia and these type of things come up with serial killers, but it's, like, it's not a great deal of planning, it doesn't take a massive amount to come up with, like, plans like this, and at the end of the day, stranger on stranger crime, which ultimately these crimes are always going to be very difficult for the police to track, so sometimes the crimes actually look better planned than they are. Like a killer, I would always go back to would be BTK, Dennis Rader, and when they were looking for him at the start and all this, it looked like this guy was a real kind of genius, like the way he was getting away with it, but he just turned out to be average, I suppose, which turns out to be a lot of the time. So it's more that it's just working in their advantage that it's stranger on stranger crime would be the main point there, I would think.
Okay, then after the murder of Polly Nichols, we have the murder of Annie Chapman, which is on September 8th. And this is perhaps the latest time that the Ripper has ever committed a murder. And it perhaps would have been after sunrise, even though it's going to be relatively still dark. We're talking about the literal sunrise. And I thank Dr. Chad for sharing that in the comments section. But do you think that is there anything that stands out to you about that crime? This is the one that has occurred in Hanbury Street, where it's possible that she was murdered around. I mean, we're dealing like 5:30 in the morning, so it wouldn't be extremely dark. Somebody may have heard someone being pushed against a fence or a wall, and they're saying no, and then they're attacked by, well, Jack the Ripper. And do you have any observations about the murder of Annie Chapman?
Yeah, I think it would certainly point to the fact that the killer was brazen, because wasn't it? It'd be correct to say that this woman was basically found in someone's backyard.
Reasonably
Which,
so, yes.
yeah, so like that's a crazy risk, I would think, for anybody to take, especially when you consider that Whitechapel, like, most people there, if they caught you in their back garden, would absolutely, like, well, would assault you, if not kill you, like, so it's a massive risk to take the victim there. But it goes back to what I was saying, like, he doesn't have a private residence himself. You know, why the hell would he take a victim to the back garden like that, take a massive risk if he had a home to go to? So I would also think that he probably didn't have a family, or maybe that's why he didn't want to go back, but maybe he lived in like one of these DOS houses where workers still stay for the night, you know, this type of thing.
Okay, I understand completely. But after the murder of Annie Chapman, we have the Dear Boss letter. It's written and dated on September 25th. And the fairest way to say it is that it's dated September 25th, but it was sent and received on September 27th of 1888. And I'm just going to ask you a very direct question. Do you believe that Jack the Ripper wrote the letters?
That's a good, it's a very good question you asked, Ned, right? Because I wouldn't, now I haven't researched this, so would this be the first crime, I don't know if you're aware, would this be the first crime where the killer was kind of in contact, like writing letters?
Well, it's really difficult to say because there are so many things that I turn up, when we find serial killer stories that are not widely publicized. And somebody told me about another similar case, and the name has escaped me, of where the killer was writing a letter. But as far as the letters, though, I mean, I'm just going to give my thoughts, and then you can let me know where I'm going wrong.
Yeah.
For a while, I was 90% certain that Jack the Ripper didn't write any of the letters. Absolutely zero. They were all hoaxes created by the newspaper business. For a while, I was even up to 99%. I was just like, these are all hoaxes, and they are just made up, and then someone's just being silly. Even giving him the trade name was something that was not done by the killer. Then I went down to about, 60% certain, as opposed to 90%, because just of the proximity of the dates and times. You have the letter being mailed on September 27th, and the killer did not act for weeks. I mean, we're talking September 8th to September 27th. That's 2.5 weeks. The next murder happens 3 days after this letter has been received that threatens to commit more crimes. It's just such a small time window. It's feasible, it's possible, but I was just like, I'm starting to think a little bit more that this could have been from the killer. But like, what do you think about that? And also, you have some real education in this. What do you think is wrong about my direction? Like, what's wrong about my thinking? Am I going down the right path? Let me know.
I think like a lot of this is common sense. Like, and you make an excellent point. Like, the newspapers could have thought of it. What's to stop that? Like, and I suppose, like, the time the letter was sent was the biggest gap in time between there being kills, wasn't there? I think it was the 8th of September he killed Annie Chapman, and then he didn't kill anyone again until the 30th of September. So maybe the papers were not selling so well, and they came up with the idea to send a letter in, and then sales would have went right back up.
Well, as far as...
You make a good point about the newspapers, but I would personally think, based on the fact it was so long ago, and it was only really the first time that these crimes like this were making newspapers, because it was actually the first generation in England that had been educated publicly, so most people could read. So this is, the first time this was happening. So it could be possible about the newspapers, yeah. Like, I think you make a good point there, but I would just be inclined to think that it was him, because it was so long ago, and that if, like, he's kind of the original guy to send a letter, that would be my thinking. If it was a hoaxer, they're not necessarily a copycat, they're not learning from noticing that other crimes did this and then they're deciding to send the letters for the laugh. That would be my inkling.
All right, though, but as far as the time gaps go, the largest time gap should have been from September 30th to November 9th between the double event and the murder of Mary Kelly. But I also have one question.
That's the longest gap, sorry, yeah.
But everything else you said stands up. everything else you said is on point. And we actually had somebody write in the comment section here on Black Box Online Radio, just saying that when you read something like the Dear Boss letter, it looks like it was written by an Englishman. It doesn't look like it was written by somebody who was, let's just say, an immigrant from Poland or Russia who learned English on the streets starting at age 16. And it has like a very, very well articulated cadence to it, well articulated language. Do you have any observations about that?
That's a good point, Ned. You make me think there. So, if the letter is the killer, that it would imply that they're definitely educated, and there is, because there's a bit of sophistication in the letter, like. And then, what did you make of the fact that he sent a kidney with the letter?
Well, with the From Hell letter, I mean, that could be one way to try and prove things, to prove that it's from the killer. Okay, now, again, I'm just going to share my thought process and what I've gathered over the years. And you guys in the comment section are absolutely amazing. And hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't. Please drop some more comments down below because you were all very, very insightful. And a lot of you guys were encouraging me to take on the angle of the Dear Boss letter was not authentic. The Saucy Jackie postcard was not authentic. So then, there's this guy who's being called Jack the Ripper, just thinking, hey, somebody's pretending to be me. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to send in something from a crime scene that's going to prove that I was the killer. So he's going to cut the kidney in half from the victim, Catherine Eddowes, mail it to George Lusk, and when you read the From Hell letter, it's totally different. It has all these types of misspellings. He even misspells the word Mr. He calls him Mr. Lusk. And it doesn't say Jack the Ripper. So it's like, it's almost as if somebody is like, no more copycat letters. I'm going to prove to somebody that I am the real killer. All right. That's something that I considered for a while, that if there was an authentic letter, it was the From Hell letter. But what do I think of the kidney? Part of me still believes... Go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
Part of me still believes that maybe it was taken from a medical lab or from a mortuary. One of the more bizarre theories out there is that somebody died in a workhouse, and before the body was sent to, the morgue, that somebody made an incision and cut out the kidney, and I'm like, whoa. I mean, I couldn't tell you how you get from point A to point B, but that's definitely a theory that's been discussed. So I think it's possible that it could have been a hoax, that the kidney could have been a human kidney that wasn't actually from Catherine Eddowes. What do you think?
Yeah, well, if you go back to the Victorian times that it was, I think, there's no other way to phrase this. It would have been easier to get your hands on body parts, right? Because there wasn't, doctors would be bringing bodies home to do, experiments on and stuff like this, and there was definitely a black market for this type of thing. Back then, I knew I know that, from research. So it would be the time to... It'd be a lot easier to get your hands on a kidney in 1888 than it would be back, now.
No, I agree with that completely, and I don't know all the specifics about black markets, but I will trust you on that, because from the other things that we've seen from the Jack the Ripper case, it's just not that well documented, and we don't have stuff like electronic locks on the doors and security cameras in 1888. People could get away with that stuff. So I think it's still possible that the kidney was a hoax. All right, though. So now we've talked about the crime scenes, and we've talked about the letters. But I will give you a choice because you're a guest. Would you like to talk about the unconfirmed crimes, or would you like to talk about the double event where the two women were murdered in one night?
I think both, actually, to be honest, Ned, because they're both such interesting topics. But I suppose we were on the victim, so...
All right, let's go.
The night that the two women were killed, that is absolute madness, right? Because there was already vigilante groups and all set up. I think that was the letter, wasn't it, to one of the heads of the vigilante groups, George Luntz, or whatever his second name was. So there was already vigilante groups out, so he attacks the first woman, kills her, I would presume you'd have to think interrupted, right? That would have to be the only reason why that he went for a second victim.
Well,
and then he...
Oh, if you were asking me, though, Is that the only reason? Well, I've definitely encountered other possibilities about how somebody could have been doing that. Number one, that it could have been a distraction and a diversion because the Ripper wanted to kill two people in one night. And an example of a person who supports that would be Randy Williams, author of Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror. And then there is another one that was discussed in Stephen Hunter's book, although that is a novel. It's fictional, but he says that he murders two women in one night because he's looking for a victim. Like, Jack the Ripper wants to kill, don't make a mistake, but he's like, this place is way too populated. I'm going to get interrupted doing my business. So he murders the woman, but he just tries to get away as quickly as possible. And those are just the first two off the top of my head of people who say that the killer was not interrupted. But I would love to know more about what you think.
Yeah, I love that trail of thought, right, about the diversion for the first body, okay? So,
Sure.
if you consider where the second body was left, it was right in Mitre Square.
That's right.
That's the name of it, right?
That's
where
right.
the second body was found. And that's the centre of town. Like, these little towns, they all kind of, side streets, they funnel into the square. So he kills the first victim, and all the cops or whatever and the angry mobs go to where the first victim is, because that's the first place you're going to go. All the while he's killing another woman right in the centre of town. So the diversion thing, I think that theory has legs.
Well, that's the way that Randy Williams portrays it, and I know I'm speaking on his behalf right now, but he's like, if one crime were committed there at Burner Street with the murder of Liz Stride, then every cop in London, or his words, would be going toward Burner Street. And then they would be like, oh no, the Ripper's attacking again, which just, again, creates this opportunity for the Ripper to go to somewhere else, that being Mitre Square. Now, that's a very, very calculated plan, but, I mean, the diversion, that part of it, I totally understand.
Yeah, because I get the impression that, like, as you're saying, the streets are dark and people are drunk and not so aware, but I think in Mitre Square, no matter what you're doing, you're going to be spotted and apprehended, and there's probably be cops around that, around the centre of town.
Now, if we're going to talk about Mitre Square, following that crime, the murder of Catherine Eddowes, somebody wrote a message on a building called the Goulston Street Graffito, and we don't know the exact text of it, but it says something like, the Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. It might be, the Jews are not the men that will be blamed for nothing. The Jews are not the men that will not be blamed for nothing. It's something to that effect, but it mentions Jews and blame. Now, it was erased by Sir Charles Warren before it could have been photographed, but do you think that that was written by the killer?
I would think See, the important thing is to place yourself back into time, right? So this is long before World War II, and like what led up to the Holocaust and all that horrible stuff was that people in Europe hated Jews. Like, there was things before the Holocaust, they were called pogroms, where like Jews were ran out of countries, and like this hatred was hundreds of years old. So back then, like, Jews were hated in London or whatever, and there was lots of anti-Semitism. So if you're the killer and you want to blame the outcasts of society or whatever would have been the interpretation back then, that would be the way to do it. And what would also, I suppose, give that theory weight would be the fact that the cops washed the stuff off the wall so quickly, because they probably didn't want to start like some witch hunt where Jewish people would start being harassed and stuff like that. Like, it could have been a societal reason why they wanted that stuff off, because from what I understand, that was the fourth kill, and people in Whitechapel were already angry about this. So if they thought it was a Jewish person, it could have led to something like really bad.
So it sounds like what you just said is that maybe the killer was not Jewish, but he actually wanted to do exactly what the Goulston Street Graffito said, blame the Jews.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting you say that, Kieran, because this is one of the biggest reversals that I had in the Jack the Ripper case. At first, I was like, absolutely not. The killer didn't write the Goulston Street Graffito. It's probably just some, simple saying that had no real value to it, that was written by some ordinary person on the street. But ultimately, I had a reversal on that, because I was like, number one, nobody seems to have reported it before the Ripper's crime, or to the best of our knowledge, no one reported that. And also, it accounts for a certain time frame where the amount of time when the Ripper would have left Mitre Square to when the Goulston Street graffito is discovered. I mean, there really is a substantial amount of time, even for the Ripper to have been doing something else before it was noticed at whatever, was it 2:30 to 2:59 in the morning. So the timelines match up as well. And as you heard, I still think that the letters are hoaxes, even though I'm only like 60% certain. Now, I'll tell you, if I had to make a decision right now, I would say that the Ripper did write the Goulston Street graffito. But that's just my take on the subject.
Yeah, I get where you're going there, and also another factor is it's the centre of town, as you said, that square is, so nobody noticed the graffiti beforehand. Like, yeah, that's a good point, Ned.
Unless, there's something that was not included in the files or that it's been lost to history, barring those exceptions. That's just the way that people have argued the case, and I was like, I completely see your point. But, Ciaran, you did say...
Gotta qualify,
Go ahead.
You gotta qualify everything with the fact it was 1888, right?
We do. I agree with that. But you did say that you wanted to talk about the unconfirmed Jack the Ripper crimes. And I think that this is a good opportunity to do so. So may I ask, where would you like to begin? Which place would you like to start with?
Well, I think there's only two victims that I would think that could possibly be linked to Jack the Ripper beforehand, and they were both killed in the Whitechapel area. I think one was killed 6 weeks before Jack the Ripper, and like she was stabbed oh god, like a horrific amount of times, like 60 odd times, and the next one, I think her throat was actually slashed as well, and also like horrifically stabbed as well. And they were both in the Whitechapel area, and like they were considered like they were known, like people were angry about these crimes as well, and they were only 6 weeks before. So as we said, it's so far back in time, it's hard to think if the people in the area were linking the crimes at this time, because from what I understand, the angry mobs were out very early about this, like, weren't they? I think after the second known victim, there was already vigilante mobs and stuff like that. So I wonder if like the society of Whitechapel was already on edge, because the two victims that were prior to the 5 known victims, the crimes were so horrific that it even like spooked Whitechapel, which would have like a massively high crime rate.
Yeah, it sounds like you're talking about the murders of Emma Smith and Martha Tabram. And you said 6 weeks, but the murder of Emma Smith is actually 6 months before. But Martha Tabram...
6 months, sorry.
But Martha Tabram was 3 weeks before. I know what you were thinking, 6, and then the weeks. Martha Tabram was murdered 3 weeks before Polly Nichols. And she's the one who stabbed an enormous amount of times, which was actually 39. And she's been the subject of the most recent Ripper Wednesdays. But I guess I just have to ask you directly, do you believe that this was the killer, the murders of Emma Smith and Martha Tabram?
I think the one that was 3 weeks beforehand, yeah, I would go with it was. There's never been any suspect mentioned ever for that crime.
No, not really, and like I'm 80% there as well, that she was murdered by Jack the Ripper, and some people even just say Jack the Ripper murdered 5 women, but it really should be 6 women for the murder of Martha Tabram, for all the reasons that you just listed out. So, do you think that there are any... Go ahead.
There could be a little bit of what people could be apprehensive about as naming her as a 6th victim is that she's tied to the woman that was killed 6 months beforehand. So you might think that there's too much of a gap in time, but 3 weeks, like, that's kind of fitting the pattern, right?
Yes, and I'm so glad you brought it up, though, about how there were indeed, like, committees that are forming after the murder of Martha Tabram, even before Jack the Ripper's Autumn of Terror, where they're already on the lookout for the killer. And then what happens? The absolute biggest serial killer in the history of the world, or the most famous one anyway. So, unfortunately, these committees did not solve the problem, and I'm not really making light of it at all. I think it's something that I don't hear talked about enough, that it does appear that there were vigilance committees forming even before Jack the Ripper operated. And it's really just sad, but that's what happened.
Yeah, see, I think Whitechapel wasn't the type of place that could be policed. So, you kind of have to be from there to police it, because it's just such a crazy place. But that would also go back to the fact that I would kind of trust the people that live there to know even more so than the police if there was a serial killer, like before the first known victim.
Absolutely.
People from Whitechapel would know better than the police.
And I would like to thank Ciaran McConnell for appearing on Black Box Online Radio. This was part 1 of our interview. I'll play part 2 next week, and I'm really hoping at some point to discuss more about the Thames Torso murder, because they were talking about it on the Rippercast, and one of these days I'm hoping to get to my standalone episode on Elizabeth Jackson, the only victim from the Thames Torso killings to have been named. But for now, I would like to just say that you can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook, and I will see you guys tomorrow for an episode about the Zodiac Killer, a bonus episode. Until next time.